class. Today we're talking about ethnocentrism, and many students find this to be kind of a fun class. It's interesting, and it really is self-reflective, so you get to think a little bit about yourself and who you are, some of your own biases, and that's really the goal of this. So it's a pretty easy assignment overall in that there is no right or wrong answer. It's just a matter of being self-reflective and putting a little bit of effort into it. So we're going to talk about first, what is ethnocentrism, and are you ethnocentric? So essentially, ethnocentrism means it's a form of bias. So we all are ethnocentric. It serves both positive and negative purposes. It's the way that you make value judgment on all the different contexts in your life, right? So we think about, in terms of our own paradigm, our own understanding of the world, our way that we've navigated the world, and what has worked for us. And so what happens with that is that we tend to think we are correct and other people are wrong. And it can get to the point where you tend to think you're more moral, the other person's less moral, you're more humane, the other person's not humane. So it can lead into a kind of very negative spiral, especially when it's magnified on a large scale, macro level scale. So on a very simple basis, we're talking about values and value judgments. So when you look at your own values, what are your own values? Your beliefs, your commitments. It's your reflection on what you believe is good and bad, right and wrong, true and untrue. Now, those are very good key indicators to let you know if somebody's making a value judgment. And we do it every day, all throughout the day. We actually need to. It's a good idea to go through a green light. It's a bad idea to go through a red light. That movie was really good. That movie was terrible. It was a horrible movie. That's the right way to go about finding a job. That's the wrong way to go about finding a job. So we do this every single day with small things and with very large things. This is the correct person, the right person to marry. This is not the right person to marry, right? So we make these value judgment based on our values that we hold dear. And all a value judgment is a comparison and a judgment based on your own personal values, your own ideas of right and wrong. Now, where the problem can come into play is when we talk about our values and what we perceive to be right and wrong compared to someone else. And there's not necessarily a true right or wrong in every situation, but we're always tending to make value judgments based on our own. And so when we look at somebody from another state, another country, another culture, we tend to look at the way they live and they perceive the world around them and their values as not as good or right or true as our own values. And we judge people based on that. So if we talk about it in terms of an example I like to use, for myself, I hold education in very high regards. And so, when we make a value judgment about education, especially as academics, we can tend to be very strict in our ideas and our values and our judgments about it. So an example that I have seen and heard, everyone should get an education. And if you ask why, an academic, for example, might tell you that knowledge is better than ignorance. Well, why is education better than ignorance? And that person might say it helps you succeed professionally. Well, then the question is, why is it better to succeed professionally? So you have to, even though we may hold certain values in our society as a constant almost, being successful is important, being educated is important, having money is important. These are all values in our society. Having luxury goods is a value in our society. Having leisure time is a value in society. So we tend to think because the broader society shares a lot of these ideologies that that's the only way or the correct way to go about doing it. And you have to be cautious when you're doing that, because you have to realize in that it's a value judgment, it becomes ethnocentric when you only want to look at it from your perspective, when you're not willing to be open-minded or unbiased in terms of the way someone else may approach a similar topic idea. Even in our own society, we have contradictory values. So at the same time that we highly value freedom in the United States, we also value laws in the United States. And so those are two very contradictory values. Another example would be the fact that we highly value individuality in our society, but at the same time we also highly value equality. Now, these things change over time, and they change from culture to culture, just like in many other things. So in some cultures, equality is valued over individuality more. In some cultures, like our own, individuality is valued over equality more. So what we tend to do is we take our own affinity and create values on that, and we don't realize we're doing this. So judging someone else, you might say something like, she's ambitious, she's pretty, he's lazy, he's dishonest. She's manipulative, he has a strong work ethic. So if a strong work ethic is important to you, you're going to make a positive value judgment on somebody based on that. If it's not, you're not going to. You might make a negative value judgment based on someone, based on that. On a more macro level, political, religious, economic leaders will tend to, with their value judgments, they tend to say that the value judgments are not a social construction of society, but handed down by some supernatural God, supernatural being, or a leader, and therefore are true and self-evident. That's a value judgment in and of itself. But then they're saying whatever their values is, because it's backed by a god or law or political leaders, therefore their values are true and good, whereas someone else's values and value judgments are bad and wrong or immoral. And so you need to be cautious when you're thinking about it also on a macro level. Sociologists would argue that values are created by people within groups. So formal organizations, communities, societies, we all make value judgments. You're going to see a higher focus on education in academia as a value. You are going to see political involvement as a stronger value among people in political groups, or in like Washington, D.C., for example. And so within different communities, if you work in a hospital, you're going to see that a strict adherence to health is probably held as a strong value within that culture. Or if you work in the police force, a strict adherence to the law might be a more tightly held value within that group. So ethnocentrism, if you break the word down to its base, ethno means your group or culture, and centrism means central to the universe. So it's this idea of thinking that your group or culture is basically the center of the universe, or the center of how everything works. This is the, basically the base for everything in the world. We have a tendency as a group, to make value judgments about other groups. So we have a tendency to believe that our way is the right way and the other group is the wrong way. And the more group isolation that you have, continuous interaction and common qualities that you have, and more communication, shared experiences, shared rules, ideas, and values, this increases ethnocentrism. So when we talk about something like the police force or the military, they have a high degree of ethnocentric thinking. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. You need a high degree of ethnocentric thinking in situations when you are, say, for example, a police force or acting in one military unit, because you need to act as a unit, think in similar ways, have the same understanding of the rules and the ideas and the values, so that you can act as a group for the safety and well-being of the entire group. So especially in military units, you will see that they basically communicate and act as a group without even really having any verbal communication. And this is because of the increased ethnocentrism. This is the same with, say, military, or not military, police officers. As a group, police officers are highly ethnocentric, and it makes them have a high degree of solidarity, and they very much back each other up. So when you see this in a group like this, we tend to make the assumption ethnocentrism is always a bad thing. It is not necessarily a bad thing. If you take it more on a personal level, we tend to be fairly ethnocentric in assuming the way we should run our home is correct. So you live with your parents or your children or your siblings, and you all have similar ways of thinking that the house should be. So, levels of cleanliness, for example, you either think you may think the house needs to be really clean or not clean at all. But as long as you agree and you have that similar value on something like cleanliness, you have less conflict. And we know that we've all kind of experienced this if we've ever lived with a roommate and you're completely irritated. I can't believe the roommate leaves dishes in the sink all the time, or do they really need to kick off their shoes at the front door so that I, step on top of them? I don't understand how they don't understand how to make their bed or how to fold a towel or how to clean a toilet, right? So this is ethnocentric thinking, and as you can see, because they don't have the continuous interaction, shared experiences, common ideas and rules, there's conflict, right? So you wouldn't want that on in a family level. Now, on a massive political, societal level, this is also what leads to war and genocide. So outsiders appear different, strange, deviant, crazy, evil, this type of thing. And we believe that our values are truths rather than socially constructed preferences. And so if we believe that and outsiders appear to be strange and crazy and evil, you're going to see that as a society, it's possible to use that for justification for killing, for military action, for war, for genocide of an entire population. And this has happened throughout our history in different perspectives one way or another. Just like you think that the people who you feel are terrorizing a nation are crazy or evil, they also believe the same thing because of similar ethnocentric thinking. So, I hope you have a good idea now of ethnocentrism. Think about it in terms of bias, but make sure you're not completely thinking about it in terms of just the negative, because there's positive and negatives. So, it should be, what you're doing for the assignment should be something similar to this. I'm going to kind of run through it. What are my interests? This helps you to look at your own values and what's important to me. What are my family's customs, morals, choices? Finish the sentence. I do not understand why people, and we do this every day, I don't understand why people cut you off and then slam on the brakes, right? Which also means you can't use that example. What are the social patterns that I see that I do not agree with? Have I ever thought people who differ from me are wrong or less than? I know it's hard to sometimes be out there with some of our own ethnocentric thinking, right? Some examples of how you would identify it is you might see something like should not, should, better, best, good, bad, superior, inferior. Make 5 value judgments, so 5 different statements. So essentially you kind of boil it down that way, right? I have values. I make value judgments. My value judgments are socially constructed. Explain how. So you're being analytical of yourself here. How are your value judgments? Where did they come from? Right? If you can identify them, where did they come from? My values are highly correlated with my membership within, and then name the particular group. What's my group and how many group values do I share? I judge others according to the values constructed within my membership in a particular group. Explain your group and how you judge others. Definitely not an easy one.